All right, so that is the official start for today's Ventura River Watershed Council meeting. Thank you, everyone, for attending. My name is Jamie Whiteford. I'm with the Ventura County Resource Conservation District, and I, along with my colleague Desiree Braga, will be facilitating today's meeting. Unfortunately, Andy Spurka and Heidi, who are typically organizing these meetings, could not be in attendance. Today, we're pleased to welcome several members of the Ventura County Public Works Agency, along with David Yardis with the Resources Legacy Fund as presenters. Today's presenters will be providing updates on the Matilaha Dam Ecosystem Restoration Project. We still have a few people trickling in, but I want to move things forward. And one of the things that I want to discuss is the question and answers. So today's agenda is slam-packed with information. So we want to ensure that the presentation moves along in a timely fashion. However, we also know that there will be questions from attendees. So therefore, please adhere to the following protocol with regard to questions. And I'm going to share my screen just so you can see what those protocols are. So please note that we actually do have a 20-minute question and discussion period that's scheduled to occur at 10:35 a.m. So if you have a general question about the project, please hold your questions until then. If that question comes to you during the presentations, please use the Q&A function that's at the bottom of your screen to type in your question, and we'll get to that. If you don't see any functionality at the bottom of your screen, move your mouse, please. It should pop up, and you should see a question and answer or Q&A there on the bottom. Following each presenter, we will take a few minutes to entertain 1 to 2 short questions. Okay, so if you have a question about the information the speaker just presented, please ask your question then. You can raise your hand after the presentation finishes so we can unmute you so you can then ask your question. Now, we can only entertain 1 to 2 questions. If we do not get to your question, please just put it into the Q&A and we'll get to it during that question and discussion period. Now, if you have an immediate question regarding the material you're viewing that is brief, articulate, and specific, okay, so you have an immediate question, it's going to be brief and specific, and it cannot wait until the presenter finishes their presentation, then please raise your hand so you can be unmuted. Again, you should be able to move your mouse to see raise your hand functionality at the bottom of your screen. Okay, so with that sort of introduction to question and answer protocol, an introduction to myself and our presenters, I'd like to go ahead and start with the presentation. And so I am going to stop share, and I'm going to hand over the helm to Glenn Shepard with the Watershed Protection Agency.
Thank you, Jamie and RCD, for hosting the semi-annual project update, and to the Ventura River Watershed Council. We'll go ahead and get going, but I just want to do a couple introductions since we're in the Zoom mode and you probably can't see us all here in the room and those who are also presenting. I'm Glenn Shepard from the Ventura County Public Works Agency and Director for Watershed Protection. In the room here with me is Matt Garrett on my right, your left. He's from Watershed Protection and the Director for Design and Construction. On the other side is Kirk Norman, who is all things Matilaha Dam Ecosystem Restoration Project for us here within the agency. And joining us today is Christopher Solis from the agency's Roads and Transportation Department, who will give us a lot of energy and pep for a big event that's coming soon, but it highlights a big milestone. And then Pam Lindsay is not in the room with us, but we'll be giving some updates, and along with David Yardis. Next slide. So this is just a brief history. I haven't shown this in the public setting in a long time, but there's been a lot of energy associated with MDERP, as we call it, and I think we'll go forward using MDERP as the acronym. And just to back up a second, Jamie, I appreciate you highlighting that you're handing over the helm, former Navy, so that that's very motivating to talk in nautical or Navy terms. But back to this slide, the brief chronological activity since the turn of the century, lots of tremendous energy and project sentiment to work on this effort coming out of the turn of the century. And then that project got derailed at the end of that first decade due to sediment controversies and whatnot. But while the flames were diminished, they weren't extinguished. And lots of work has gone on, but we certainly lost a lot of time. But since then and leading up to 2017, a lot of renewed energy. And then after 2017, some hallmark grant from Department of Fish and Wildlife really got going. And from that point, I've had this moniker of, we're making progress and we're building momentum. And so those are, that's been my moniker along the way. And certainly the focus from this point on is really going to look from 2017 on. The presentations going on today are updates from there. And it's been 5 years since then, and we continue to move along in the right direction. So you're going to hear that energy going forward from the briefs, and lots of activity has taken place since our last public update in April. Next slide. I won't belabor this. This is a pictogram of our infrastructure projects and with the dam removal that we've shown for many years. We're in the process of updating this slide, or the pictogram on the right. I just wanted to highlight, again, Christopher Solis is here. That's why the Santa Ana Bridge replacement has a little blue highlight there, a call out where the big activity is coming there. Next slide.
Glenn?
Yes.
I'm not seeing your slides.
We lost your screen share.
Can you, on the right?
No
Back
better.
one.
Thank you.
Very good.
Go back one. So I was briefly discussing this slide. So you heard the audio. This is the slide. I won't go over it. It's been in the public domain for some time, and will be talked about through today's presentation. Next. The project management updates since our last meeting. Matt Eric, who I introduced, is here. He has the helm again for design and construction within watershed protection. And Kirk Norman, who's been on board since last October, remains here. Pam Lindsay, who you are all familiar with and has been on this project for forever, continues to be in our environmental services manager, and is now integrated within design and construction functionally. So that's good news. And she's in the process of hiring some Nepa very needed Nepa support for her unit, and we hope to have that person on board by the end of the month going forward. So as that Kirk advanced it that quickly, we're on to the funding updates. Again, welcome everyone. We're excited to have you all here in the public, and have carved out a couple hours to join us in this fall update. And I'll now pass it over to David Yardis.
Excellent.
Thanks, Glenn. Let me just, Jamie, did you want to jump in the middle at all?
No, I just wanted to say thanks for moving that along, Glenn. We might even be able to squeak in a little bit of a bathroom break there in the middle.
All right, bear with me. Let me get my screen teed up here. Great. Can you all see that okay?
Yes. Thanks.
Apologies. Sorry, I need to change this mode first. There we go.
Mute us.
Okay. Thanks. Hi, everybody. Thanks for the patience. I'm David Yardis. I'm a consultant to the Resources Legacy Fund, focusing on the Matilla Dam Ecosystem Restoration Project and Dam Removal Initiative. I work very closely with the County of Ventura, a number of the partners and stakeholders to try to move this forward with a particular focus on sort of funding for the various project components. So I was going to provide a real quick update from our spring. We do these every 6 months. I'm not sure that everybody in the audience necessarily was at that meeting, so I'll be jumping over a lot of things. Obviously, if you have questions, jump in when needed. Just briefly, I wanted to give a quick snapshot on where we stand with fundraising as of end of September of this year. What's happened since the spring updates, some current and pending requests, focusing on state funding opportunities, federal funding updates. What does that mean in terms of kind of the big picture costs and fundraising? And then any immediate questions and discussion before the end of the session. This is just a quick recap of the money that's been raised since the initial funding that Glenn mentioned that was provided by the Department of Fish and Wildlife back in 2017. That grant and initiative continues to, fuel the project forward. But all of these subsequent efforts have proceeded apace, fundraising being kind of the front end of making sure that you can then follow through with lining up consultants and getting the work done that needs to be done. We're pushing towards $30 million since that time. The green highlights are throughout this presentation are things that have happened, particularly since last spring, and notably the final design grant from Wildlife Conservation Board for Camino Cielo was approved by the WC board back in August. And then we also received a notification of an award for $1.56 million from Department of Fish and Wildlife for the Robles Phase 2 project. I realized that we didn't go through any of the project components, so I hope it will make sense to talk about a couple of things here. If Kirk will also be speaking to kind of updates on the technical work program for each of the components. And so hopefully you'll have a decent understanding by the end, but apologies in advance if there's not enough background. We're happy to circle back. So the Camino Cielo Bridge redesign, one of those two grants, the August approval by the Conservation Board. This really is a combined effort along with the State Coastal Conservancy, roughly $2 million altogether. And it will take the project from a soon to be initiated value engineering review of an existing draft 30% design all the way through to final design, as well as including initial studies and a completion of a subsequent EIR for this project. The goal is to move this forward in starting next month, hopefully, with once we get the Board of Supervisors approval of the final WCB grant, and then with the goal of being shovel ready in the course of 2 to 3 years. Shovel ready meaning ready for implementation as soon as we can raise the money to do that. the purpose here, I should just maybe note briefly, is ultimately a replacement of the existing river crossing, a series of box culverts, and to replace them with some kind of a modest span type structure that will allow much higher flows to pass, along with substantial sediment flows with the initial sediment release upstream, and just provide a lot more safety and continuity, as well as improve fish passage on the way. So it's a multi-benefit project that is probably next up for implementation. Another big focus of activity has been the Robles Miners Oaks project. The Robles Diversion and Fish Passage facility downstream of Camino, Cielo, is sort of co-located with the Miners Oaks community and the need for enhanced flood protection there. And so these projects have kind of been bundled together from a project workflow and fundraising perspective. We were awarded this $1.5 million and change to get the phase 2 effort off the ground. Once again, the Coastal Conservancy is a partner here as well, from a previous grant. And taken together, these should take us through an alternatives refinement process focused on Robles all the way through approximately 10% design. We will be continuing to work for additional funding to round out 30% design for both of these, both the Miners Oaks and Robles diversion. That work, all of this work will, the so-called phase 2 redesign effort will get way early next year, sometime March, April period. We're in the midst of a consultant selection process right now, and that'll take a little more time to work through and to secure all the board approvals for that. But this work will be moving forward fairly soon. I know Kirk will speak to it a bit more. Currently, we have a contingency funding request pending, basically to round out the work program that started in 2017 under that original project grant. There's a number of pieces of the puzzle that need additional support, new things that have been learned that require additional work. And things like the Department of Safety of Dams imposing a design fee, a fee based on the anticipated future cost upon review of the 65%, for their review of the 65% design. That was an unanticipated cost back in 2017. So we're kind of constantly adaptively managing the funding flow to align with current needs, priority needs, to keep everything moving. But we submitted a final augmentation request for a little over 1.7 million back in September, and had some good discussions since with watershed restoration grant staff, and are hoping for an award decision on at least most of those elements very soon, in the next month or two. In addition, we are in discussions with the Wildlife Conservation Board. In 2020, they provided a final design project grant for the dam removal project and the 3 downstream flood protection projects. In order to kind of move all of that forward, we are also now talking with them about possible additional funding for subsequent EIRs for the 3 flood protection components, and some increased final design costs and contingencies to grapple with the now new inflationary environment that I'm sure everybody who is working on grant projects is now grappling with, of wow, how do we do this? How do we adjust? How do we move forward? So we're all struggling with that, but we've had very good conversations with Wildlife Conservation Board staff, and look forward to getting this in place by early next year as well. And then lastly, we're anticipating under the forthcoming Proposition 168 solicitation, Department of Fish and Wildlife, likely early in 2023, will be kind of rounding out the Robles Phase 2 project, trying to line up subsequent EIR funding, and likely pitching at least some other priority requests depending on what happens with the several pending grants that I mentioned earlier. On the federal funding side, we are underway with a preliminary investigation under the so-called Public Law 83566 program. It's for watershed protection and flood control improvements. This has a potential for more than $50 million of future implementation and some final design and planning funding for Robles and the 3 flood components. We'll be pursuing an application for that early in 23. It's a busy end of year, start of year, in part because of the extraordinary funding opportunities that lay in front of us right now. Bureau of Reclamation, we have a pending appropriation for up to $1.5 million as part of the fiscal 23 budget bill, now kind of hopefully working its way through the Congress. We're finally off the ground with the Federal Emergency Management Agency, a small but critical grant for the structural analysis of the orifice design as the key to sediment release out of the Matilaha Reservoir. And then the reinitiation, we talked about this last spring, possible reevaluation of the 2007 project authorization to keep that authorization on the books, potentially to update it in the future, but not the sort of. It's an important piece of the puzzle that we've initiated early in the year and are waiting to see how that evolves going forward, waiting for the Corps' response and whatever it might take in terms of additional information. I'm gonna jump from there straight into this kind of quick snapshot of the project funding picture. We have been carrying a projected cost on the order of 180 million for the last 3 or 4 years for all components of the project, all the design, all the planning, all of the environmental compliance, implementation costs, and then post-removal costs as well. Those numbers have increased to the tune of about 11 million over the past several years, mainly through a more realistic and comprehensive view of what's needed from the design to round out the design and planning portfolio, kind of what I just walked through. Of that current total of about 190, roughly 27 million has been raised to date. I mentioned previously the NRCS potential, as well as additional BOR funding in excess of $50 million potential. We're in dialogue with all of the resource agencies about what's realistic for the current extraordinary surplus funding opportunities at the California Natural Resource Agency, sister agencies. And then when you take all of those and with the good fortune that all of that takes shape and happens per the plan, we still have about a $50 million uncertainty. It's not that there's not ideas about how to fill it. There's lots of ideas. It's just that some of the constraints, for example, on the surplus funding, the current funds that are currently available are only available for a 5, 6, at most 7-year period. And so a lot of what needs to happen doesn't fit well into that timeline, but sets the stage for a lot of things to follow. So this is where the critical work will be as we move forward, securing kind of these existing opportunities. And last, I just wanted to stop briefly to kind of step back and kind of go back to dam removal, as this is all about dam removal. All of those downstream projects, all of the pre-dam removal funding from the prior slide, this sort of $100 million total or so, that all is what's needed to get to the point where the dam can actually be taken out. A couple of things of note: we do have final design funding in place, and we're pursuing as part of that Wildlife Conservation Board an augmentation for that to make sure we can get that work done in the next 2 years. And then going back to the total costs, we know that, for example, the estimated cost of taking the dam out, which kind of includes the reservoir prep, the orifice construction and installation, sediment release, structural demolition, and post-removal restoration, That is more like a $40 million item than the $30 million that it was previously. So, and with the inflation happening, we really are grappling in a cost increasing environment. So we need to be prudent and timely about moving all of this forward to get as much done as possible before more of that happens. I think it's kind of an all hands on deck right now, but with luck and commitment, we will have a shot at having the initial sediment release. But by the end of the decade, that's kind of what we're all collectively shooting for and dividing our efforts around. And hopefully we will get there and maybe even get there sooner. Who knows? That's all I've got. Let me pause a second. If there are any immediate questions, Jamie, could you help with that? And otherwise, I'll hand it back to the rest of you.
Thank you, David. I'm not seeing any immediate questions. If anybody does have a question, please feel free to raise your hand so that we can ID you and then unmute you. You can also pop a question into Q&A. Again, if you don't see those functionalities, make sure to move your mouse on your computer. That should wake up the Zoom screen, and those functions should appear on the bottom of your computer screen. While we wait for some questions, David, I apologize for my ignorance. So when the flows start, is through the orifices in the dam, is the dam like overall structure going to remain, or is that all of that concrete going to be taken out? Or will we talk about this later?
Well, Kirk, I'm sure we'll talk about it. In brief, the idea is that the orifices allow for the sediment to flow through in a large initial release, and during a storm of appropriate size and under hydrologic conditions that support that kind of release. So you want a kind of a charged watershed, if you will, and the right size storm event. Once that happens, then the dam is taken down, because you have to get rid of a bunch of the sediment behind the dam before you can take it down. That's the big challenge, and what to do with that sediment. That's where the project bogged down back in the mid 2000s or whatever, was around that challenge. This way, we're trying to use the natural flows of the river to move the sediment through. Once that big release has happened, then the dam can be taken down within, as I understand it, a matter of a year or two.
Okay.
And then there's some buttoning up, site restoration, perhaps habitat restoration upstream, et cetera. But
Okay.
Kirk or others, do you want to take that and do?
Or we can just switch to your presentations if you're ready, if you're going to be addressing that too. I still don't see any questions, so it seems like you did a good job presenting that information in a very clear and articulate fashion, David. So
thanks, Jamie.
Excellent. We can see your screen, Kurt.
Okay, thank you, Jamie. So the first couple of technical updates will be on the bridges. So I'm going to turn it over to Christopher Solis to speak about the project that they've been working on.
Thank you, Kurt. So yeah, so I'm the project manager. I'm working on the Santa Ana Boulevard Bridge construction. We are essentially complete. This picture is from the spring update earlier this year, and it shows where we were at. We have the new bridge on the upstream side, and then you can see the old bridge there, and you can see that we have that extra section now. So that's where we were. Go to the next slide. And sorry. And this is essentially what it is, what it looks like now. This was just a couple weeks ago. All the channel grading has been completed. We finished paving and conforming the roadways, and all the riprap and slope has been constructed. The only remaining items are just the conforming of some fences and gates or you join private property, but for all intents and purposes, the project is complete. Next slide. So here's some pictures previous month working on this riprap slope and the concreted riprap near the abutments. Seeing what we've been doing out there. Next slide. More of that work, just clearing and grading the channel so it's ready to get some flows in there. All right. And then this is just an update on the Camino Cielo bridge project. That's, you know, we have the funding for design, so we're looking at the value engineering, essentially looking at a couple options. Here's one, just in the vicinity of the low weather crossing, just upstream, maybe constructing the bridge there. The other on the next slide. Well, there's another version we're also looking at from the spring. Yeah, I guess it got out of there, but just on the downstream side, putting the bridge on there. But we're looking at various options to maintain access during construction and also engineer it where the cost is within our secured funding budget we're anticipated. But essentially, yeah, we're just trying to raise the low weather crossing so we can pass the water without impacting access. That's all I got.
Okay, then this is Robles diversion. We're looking upstream at the head pond. On the left, you can see the diversion and the fish passage, and downstream, the braided Ventura River sediment's been issued at the facility. And so once the dam comes down, that'll be exacerbated. We want to look at some alternatives for increasing the sediment transport through here, as well as improving perhaps water supply and steelhead fish passage. So this is the long pole in the tent, it looks like at this time, as David mentioned. But what we're showing here is looks like with an optimistic timeline, we can get it done by 2030. So that's the same time the orifices are installed, and it'd be keeping the same schedule. Let's see. There's this are just some sediment slides from 2021 showing the efforts of Casitas. They put a lot of work in to keep fish passage going and harvesting water to keep the facility functioning. In the early phases of design work, a variety of alternatives were looked at. There was 13 alternatives for increasing sediment transport, increasing water harvest, providing for steelhead passage, and also for protecting the Miners Oaks area, which is just downstream of Robles. And those were consolidated into 5 alternatives, with one alternative being no action. But the alternatives are to increase the enhanced sluicing, it's called, allowing sediment to roll through the floodgates that Casitas has. And thank you. The another option is that is what they call right channel bypass. Looking downstream, the right channel is capacities increase with additional gates and rock ramps included for fish passage. Option 4 is stream bifurcation along high flow rock ramp for fish passage during high flows, where the main channel brings diversion over. This is, there hasn't been a lot of study on this one for this project. The fifth option is the high flow bypass on the left side of the channel looking downstream. So this is one of the braids in the Ventura River, just, I guess, just east of the current active low flow. We gave the update on these alternatives to the Casitas Municipal Water Board on April 27th, and to develop the 5 alternatives for what we need to do is we need to narrow the focus. We want to, like David mentioned, we have a consultant selection process in place. We'll be getting statement of qualifications tomorrow to take these alternatives, develop them enough so that a decision can be made as to which alternative goes forward with to final design, 30% design, then final design. Concurrently, the Natural Resource Conservation Service has initiated a preliminary feasibility investigation report in August. And that should be completed in October. The purpose is to assess if the improvements for agricultural water supply and flood protection would warrant a watershed protection plan for the Ventura River. And the reason that's important to us is because they will pay for design and construction. They'll share the cost of construction for ag water and pick up the cost for design and construction of flood protection. So again, that would to achieve the goals of sediment transport, fish passage, water resiliency, and flood protection. Then downstream of Robles and Miners Oaks are 2 levee facilities. You can see Lake Casitas here on your left, Santa Ana Road and Santa Ana Boulevard Bridge that Chris was just talking about crosses the Ventura River here. So Live Oak Acres Levy is one of the levee projects, and it extends up to the Live Oak Acres diversion where it crosses from crosses under Burnham Road. We awarded a design contract for this in May. The design's anticipated to take about 2 years to complete. So spring 2024, the design will be complete. And in the meantime, we're pursuing funding to get the CEQA documents underway, like David had mentioned. Downstream of the Live Oak Acres levee is the Casita Springs levee. It runs from Edison Hill up to just downstream of San Antonio Creek. It's another area that gets some sedimentation, and so we expect to get a design contract out. I'm thinking mid-December, early January. And speaking with the project manager, thinks design will be done in about 18 months to 2 years. And so that's maybe lagging a little bit behind Live Oak Acres, but in a similar fashion, we're pursuing CEQA funding to get the CEQA process underway. And this shows those alignment on the left shows the Casita Springs levee as it is, goes up from station 5 to 60. In the discussions, the early preliminary design, it was determined we could bring it over and tie it into Highway 133, which would allow this area, which is now a kind of a pit area. Pam Lindsay calls it the pit of despair because the levee separates it from the Ventura River. We can eliminate that. And this third alignment shows we pulling the levee in closer away from the active channel for the downstream 500 feet. And that kind of covers the levees. And later today, we'll be getting updates from the technical team on 65% design. In this slide, we can see the level of the sediment behind the dam, and the valve is open, so water continues that does arrive in the reservoir is being discharged downstream. I guess I can't call it a reservoir currently. This is the current condition, and the dam removal is going to occur in 2 phases. Phase 1 is the prep phase, and then it's a preparation for the flushing event. Wait for the flushing event, and then once the flushing event has occurred, then we can come in and remove the dam. The preparation is anticipated to take 1 season. After the flushing event, dam removal is expected to take 1 season. And I know a lot of people are familiar with the dam removal plan right now, which is to drill 2 large orifices through the lower part of the dam. I want to just cover it in case anybody new is joining us. And this is looking upstream at the dam, so we probably need to put the scissors logo in here somewhere to get an idea. This is looking upstream, but the 2 orifices are installed, 13-foot diameter tunnels drilled within 5 feet of the back of the dam, 12-foot diameter steel pipe and grouted in place. Optionally, there's some gates, which has been discussed by the technical team. Other items related, so then we wait for the flushing event when it's forecast. The current plan is for a team of blasters, a demolition crew to come in and set some low, forget what they call them, low charges. They're set off in a series so that it's a controlled failure of this last 5 feet, which opens up the orifices. And that happens just days before the forecast event. Other items that need to be done in preparation is a pilot channel, which this extends about 3,000 feet from the dam through the former reservoir area, upstream to getting upstream here, pretty close to the end of what we call the vegetation clearing area. The purpose of the pilot channel is to maximize the amount of sediment that's flushed with the flushing event. You can see there's the tendency currently is there's a predominant channel on, I guess this is the north side and along the south side. So getting the pilot channel in the center, it's mapped somewhat the original location and profile of the creek before the dam was constructed. So that's just to increase the amount of flushing. Similarly, there's some vegetation clearing areas. The light blue is areas that would probably be disked, whereas the green area, it would be removed. And this, you know, the diversion or the pilot channel that we just looked at starts a little bit downstream of this veg clearing area. and runs down into the disc area. The vegetation clearing is necessary to prevent debris accumulations either in the reservoir channels or in the orifices. There's staging areas. This is here's staging area for phase 1 to install the tunnels for the orifices. I use the phrase orifice and tunnels. They're kind of, yes, a fine point for engineers. The tunnel, we know what a tunnel is. The orifice refers to the type of flow through an opening, either rectangular or circular. It's also phase 2 staging area here at the Matilaha Hot Springs, and so it may be used as staging for phase 1 as well. So I talked about a lot about stage 1. There's discussion of the flushing event. I don't talk a lot about phase 2 because a lot of the aspects get left to the contractor, but a lot of thought has been put into it, and development of a way to address it will be covered in some detail in the technical meeting this afternoon. But I did want to, I know this, David answered the question well. There's talk, I think, about the sedimentation, and there's a series of one-dimensional and two-dimensional models done over the past couple of years for both sediment transport and hydraulics. The first one was done all the way from the dam downstream to the river mouth. That was a 1D model and a 1D hydraulic model. And then the technical team decided we needed better information along some of the critical reaches, which go from, say, Camino, Cielo to Robles and on downstream. But the original model, they took it from the dam, called the course model, downstream of the dam, probably at the confluence of North Fork Matilaha Creek, through Camino, Cielo and Robles and Live Oak Acres. They took it down to the wastewater treatment plant downstream of San Antonio Creek. And subsequent to that, the technical advisory committee wanted more refined two-dimensional modeling through critical reaches, which included Camino, Cielo, Robles, Live Oak Acres, Casitas Springs, and so that's shown in the purple, the refined 2D model. It looks like took it down to probably the wastewater treatment plant again. So that's the amount of quite a bit of sediment modeling to date. There's needs to be independently reviewed for technical conformance with industry standards. That's going to be an important step. There's some additional work or analysis that we're contemplating, but this is going to form the basis for addressing we anticipate the impacts are going to be and how they can be mitigated, which Pam will be talking about in a moment. And I did want to just conclude with saying the reason for all these projects, of course, is to get the watershed health and function back, open up the headwaters, restore the habitat downstream while increasing our water resiliency. So with that, our next presenter is going to be Pam Lindsay. And Pam, I'll be, hope I don't rush you like I did Glenn, but I know that you're not shy, so we'll work together and get through these next slides. think. So,
Thank you, Kirk. There were several questions. If we could pause for a moment, I hope you don't mind, Pam.
sure.
I'm going to go ahead and read these questions. However, for those who did pose those questions, if you'd like to add some clarifying responses, please feel free to raise your hand and do so. So there are right now 4 questions from 3 attendees. I'll start with the first question, which is from Julie. This was directed towards Christopher Solis. The question, was there any archaeological monitoring by an archaeologist or native monitor for the Santa Ana Bridge replacement?
No, not on during the construction project. There wasn't. We were monitoring species and birds and bats and any kind of critters that would come on site, but I don't think it triggered archaeological monitoring. I mean, Pam maybe can clarify.
Sure, I talked to Julie the other day about this. There was only one location within the work area that was what we considered undisturbed fill or undisturbed earth. Everything else in the work area had been disturbed, and so that means dug up previously or within the river bottom, which is rearranged many times by Mother Nature. The scour depth there is quite low. So if there was any archaeology and Native American monitoring that was required, it was for some areas on the southeast side where some excavations to realign some of the buried facilities, utilities was going to be, but I wasn't tracking the project closely, so I can certainly check, Julie, and get back to you on that monitoring.
Thank you, Pam. Thank you, Chris. Julie, if you have any follow-up with that, please feel free to retype in the Q&A or raise your hand. Meanwhile, we'll move to the additional questions. There are 2 questions that follow from the same individual, Tom. I'm going to go ahead and read your 2 questions. If you have any additional clarifying questions or if you want to respond to the responses, please feel free to raise your hand and I'll unmute you. Meanwhile, these are fairly general questions, but it seemed to match what you were discussing, Kirk, so I'll direct those towards you. First question is, are there any emerging land acquisition priorities in the area of the Live Oak Levy area?
Yeah, so we'll have to do some, let's see, whether it be construction or permanent. The land acquisitions would be related to construction, construction of the new levee, and outside of that, I'm not aware of any, and I don't know which ones are prioritized yet, but there will be some land, either temporary and or permanent, that we need to pick up.
All right, thank you so much. Again, Tom, if you have any follow-ups on that, please raise your hand so we can unmute you. I'll move on to Tom's second question. The question is, did the 2D modeling affect the planning for the Casitas levy at all?
Not really. The levee had some deficiencies as it is now today, and with some deposition coming downstream, raised the waters. The impacts of the 2D are more muted than the 1D, and so it might be, it'll reduce the height say a foot. So there may be some impacts to levee height.
Thank you, Kurt. And presumably that won't impact the timing of everything. It seems like everything is this is my personal question, sorry. It seems like the timing is pretty tight for a lot of this work, but it won't affect the timing and push the overall project timeline back.
Right, I don't anticipate it will, Jamie. And so one of the activities of the 2D model, I said that the results are generally more muted than the 1D model. Downstream, upstream of Robles, they're more severe. So just wanted to make that point. But also, now that the 2D model is a general model, it's doing the whole watershed. Now we're picking up segments of it that we'll use the 2D data for, but the design teams that are working on those components, they're gonna look at it at a closer level, a closer geographic level. They're gonna be looking at the reaches that they're working on, specific reaches of the river. So that's part of the design process.
Excellent, thank you, Kurt. The final question that I have in the queue comes from Andrew. Again, Andrew, if you would like some additional clarification, feel free to raise your hand, but I'll read your question for you. This is specific to an acronym, I believe. On slide 23, Andrew asks, what does HECRAS station stand for? HECRAS.
Sure, that's
So it's Hydrologic Engineering Center River Analysis System. It's a computer program developed by the Corps of Engineers to model river flow. It's kind of an industry standard for what we do for flood protection for levees and design.
Excellent, thank you, I appreciate that. All right. So that closes the current questions that we have. Again, if to the attendees, if you have questions that spring to mind, please feel free to put those in the Q&A, or you can jot them down. We will be able to accommodate questions during the questions and discussion period again, which should be coming up potentially a little bit quicker than we anticipated because our agenda is moving along very briskly. Thank you, presenters, for that. We actually do have a few moments. We can take 5 minutes to go to the restroom, if that would be good for the presenters. If so, please let me know. Otherwise, we'll move into Pam's presentation. All right, sounds like we're ready to just continue to move forward. So Pam, if you're queued up, I'd love to have you start.
Okay, looks like I'm queued up, and Kirk will advance the slides for me, which I appreciate. So, excellent. Hi everybody, I'm Pam Lindsay. I am the Environmental Program Manager for Watershed Protection, and I'll present the next section of the presentation, which is the environmental updates. So, today, I'm going to give an update on the California Environmental Quality Act and National Environmental Policy Act policy processes, the regulatory permitting processes, and the ongoing giant reed and tamarisk removal and Matilaha Lake status. So something I haven't talked about yet in any detail in these presentations that I've done in the past has been NEPA, or the National Environmental Policy Act. That's similar to CEQA. It actually predates CEQA. It's for projects on federal land that are federally funded or require federal permits. So NEPA is the federal equivalent of CEQA. They're a little bit different, but very much similar. So as a reminder, a combined NEPA CEQA document was actually completed and certified in 2004. It was an EIS-EIR, so an environmental impact statement, environmental impact report, for the Matilaha Dam Ecosystem Restoration Project. A subsequent document is required under CEQA section 15162 if a project change results in new significant impacts not discussed in the previous report. So similar policy or similar information is required for the Nepa documents as well. So I'll get into that in more detail later. So the next slide. So as you've seen from the previous presentations, we have a lot of project components that are all being kind of worked on at once. We have a lot of preliminary design that's been done, and those are moving into the later phases of design. And we need to do the CEQA and Nepa processes before we get much further in the design processes. So right now we have the Matoaha Dam removal with natural sediment transport project. That CEQA document is in progress. Nepa probably won't be done for several years yet. Because we're not sure if we're going to get federal funding for that or how that's going to work out. So that will be kicked down the road just a little bit. Camino Cielo Bridge, we're going to start the subsequent CEQA document on that probably in January or so. We do have funding for that, so we're in the process of selecting a consultant. So that work should begin soon. The Live Oak Acres and Casitas Springs levees, we'll probably start that CEQA work about a year from now. We are waiting for some funding for those CEQA processes, and then the NRCS process that Kirk talked about briefly, they will be conducting the NEPA for that, for those two levees during their process. So, and then Robles and Miners Oaks will follow up a couple years later with those CEQA and NEPA processes. So we have a lot of environmental processing to do in the next several years. So stay tuned. We'll try and keep it simple and easy to follow, but each one of these has a particular process that we need to go through. So I'll explain that next. Let's see, next slide. Oh, but before we get to the process, so the impacts and the issues that we're looking for, basically, we have some significant impacts to water resources, agriculture, bio, air quality, geology, and we have some hazards, wildfire, and cultural and tribal resources. Those will be discussed at length, and then we have less than significant or beneficial impacts to the column on the right. You know, for beaches, community character, noise, recreation, there will be some benefits, scenic resources. So those are the issues that we're looking at during a CEQA and NEPA process. So next slide. So what does that process look like? I wanted to go into this in a little bit more detail because I haven't done that in the past. So what are the steps to do a subsequent environmental impact report? And these steps have been laid out specifically for the dam removal component that we're working on now, but they'll basically generally apply to all the others. So first, you go through the 2004 document and you review and summarize the impact thresholds, the analyses, and the conclusions. So what did we say before? Second, you then look at the project area and the environmental conditions and the environmental regulations, and you see what's changed. 2004 was a long time ago. What has changed? So you document those changes. Next, we want to conduct substantial public outreach to get input on the new dam removal method with this natural sediment transport regarding impacts, mitigation measures, benefits. This is in addition to the initial CEQA required scoping that was conducted a couple of years ago. We want to spend more time talking to the public and stakeholders about the project so that we can inform our CEQA analyses. Then we'll conduct the analyses. We'll be preparing the public draft SEIR by finishing those, updating the mitigation measures, And then that then takes us to the public draft stage, where we release a public draft of the SEIR for a 45-day public comment period. Then following that, we consider those comments as well, prepare a final document. We respond to those comments, make any changes to the SEIR as needed, and then we notice and hold a public hearing for that final document. So we see, next slide. So this is a little more streamlined version of all of that discussion. So we did the initial CEQA scoping 2 years ago. We've learned a lot about the project and how this is going to work. We have a lot more detail. So we want to take those details with the 65% design report to the public, do additional outreach and informational meetings, and gather more information. Basically, that's going to happen in the next 6 months or so. And then we'll proceed with finishing the public draft SEIR and do the public comment period and then finish up the process. So we're thinking maybe spring of 2024, we'll have the SEIR ready for a public hearing. Let's see, next slide. So the additional public outreach, again, that's from about January to June of 2023. We want to receive input to make sure that we're filling the community needs. We want to listen to the landowners, community groups, utilities, water agencies, the general public, and get your feedback. And we want to make it easy with meetings, websites, personal communications. We're hiring a professional, what I call a professional listening firm, who will help us communicate the project and the questions and solicit feedback so that we can make the project better and thoroughly analyze any impacts that may occur and come up with good mitigation measures. How can we make this project work for everyone? Next slide. So concurrently, the Ojai Valley Land Conservancy is conducting some community engagement on what shall we do with the future vision? What kinds of recreation, public amenities, what resources should we preserve? What we're really thinking ahead on what will the future bring once the dam is removed? How do we want the canyon to look? How do we want to invite people in to enjoy our newly restored channel and our newly restored creek? So, and this was made possible by a grant from the Resources Legacy Fund. So while our public outreach is working on the functionality of dam removal itself, the Ojai Valley Land Conservancy outreach is looking beyond that to how do we restore the public amenities once the dam is removed. So those things will be going on concurrently. So there'll be a lot to participate in. All right, next slide. So regulatory permitting. So all these components are going to need permits from the Army Corps of Engineers, Regional Water Quality Control Board, California Department of Fish and Wildlife, National Marine Fisheries Service, and U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. These are the agencies in charge of protecting our wildlife and water. So each of these project components individually has some impacts and benefits, and then together as a unit, they have impacts and benefits. So we're looking at a streamlined master permit process for all the components with these agencies, basically as a group. Although they have slightly different needs as different agencies and slightly different regulations, we want to make sure that we're answering all the questions and all the needs for each of the agencies all at once. So with one big permit application package, and capture the dam removal benefits that offset the impacts associated with each of the project components. Because we are looking at ecosystem restoration, that is the goal. So each of these agencies, we've been meeting with them, talking with them about how to get this done. They're very excited about it, looking at the end goal for having that dam removed. So we should be starting that regulatory permitting process in earnest this spring as well. Next slide. Okay. So, and as you're aware, we've been doing some giant reed and tamarisk and other species removal since 2007. This is the update. So retreatment number 21 was completed this spring and summer. We actually included a remnant giant reed patch that was up beyond the Fish and Wildlife or the Forest Service gate. There's a couple more patches that we still need to go get and make sure that they do not persist, because if we leave one shred of giant reed up there, all this work will be for naught. So we are diligently working on that. We have full retreatments scheduled through 2025, and then we'll be reevaluating how to fund the ongoing giant reed removal and habitat restoration after that. So let's see. We actually completed the work between May and June in most of the river area that you see. The gray area is the basically the larger floodplain of Matilaha Creek and the Ventura River. That is the 1,200 acre work area. And then the reservoir area with all of its cattails, I'll show you that in a few minutes. That took a couple weeks in July to go treat. So we had to go pick through all the cattails to find the tamarisk seedlings in there. So next. So this slide is similar to the one that I showed in April. The Matilaha lake level, if you've noticed, there's no lake, and there probably won't be in the future. Casitas Municipal Water District is still allowed to manipulate the valves during the winter season for a few months so that they can download some water as needed for drought conditions. But this particular winter season, the valves remained open and there was no ponding. I mean, it will pond for a couple of days following a large storm event, just because the amount of water coming into the reservoir is bigger or is larger than what can fit through those valves pipes. So it does pond for just a few minutes and then it drains out. So the next slide. So without any water, the cattails have moved in to the former reservoir area. The lake bed is filling in quickly with vegetation. The cattails were first to arrive. We've been trying to squelch the tamarisk that have grown up in there. The cattails are becoming quite thick in just a year. You can see how on the left, this is September of 2021, there were quite a few open patches where you could easily walk through the reservoir bottom area or the lake bed. And now on the right, that was from July of 2022. It's super dense, super thick. It's really hard to work your way through there. And so it took twice as long for the crew to get through the lake bed area to do the giant reed and tamarisk removal. And the willows are coming in. There's actually willows right up against the dam. So if you're below the dam looking up at the dam crest, you can see willows starting to crest and look over the dam themselves. So so the lake bed, what used to be mud, is turned to cattail marsh, and eventually that willow thicket that you see upstream of the cattail marsh, that will proceed downstream. It will incrementally move forward towards the dam. So in 8 years, when it's time to dig that pilot channel, there will be a riparian forest that we will have to remove in order to facilitate those sediments flushing through. But in the meantime, it is wonderful habitat for many, many critters. And that is the end of my presentation. So if there's any questions, be happy to answer them.
Thank you so much, Pam. And in fact, you do have a question.
Okay.
Actually, it's more of a general question. I'm sure the rest of the audience will appreciate. But it is, where may I get copies of the slides that were presented today? So I'm anticipating that those will be available in some
Jamie,
way,
I can
shape, or
speak.
form.
I can, this is David Yardis, I can address that. So all of the presentations will be uploaded to the matillahadam.org website. The link to it is listed right there. Hopefully by the end of next week, but very soon, one way or another. There's a site migration going on right now, so we have to let that get finished, change of servers. But those are available on the documents page of the website. There's a whole section on the community and technical updates, including presentations and recordings from meetings going back to the early 2020, I believe it was.
Okay, David, what I'd like to do, if you don't mind, I can open up chat briefly so that you can post that URL, if that would be okay, so that everyone
Sure.
can see it. All right. Pam, I have a question related to the very last thing that you said. So now that there's this wonderful habitat, is that going to present an issue with respect to the dam? Presumably not, but with all of this wonderful habitat that's going to be in existence over the next 8 years or so, how does that impact like CEQA?
Right. So there are some substantial impacts that will occur to that habitat, of course. That will be fully evaluated in the CEQA documents, and it will also be fully evaluated in the processes that we get through with the regulatory agencies. We understand that this is an artificial situation. Yes, we provide lots of habitat in the meantime, but ultimately the goal is to restore Matilaha Creek as a creek and not as a former lake bed full of willow habitat. So that trade-off will be explained in the permit process as well as in the CEQA process. So yeah, it's unfortunate, but you have to break a couple eggs to make an omelet, right? So that's why the ecosystem restoration is so important to the project description, because that's the goal. And yes, we will lose some of that fabulous habitat, but we will gain the functional riparian habitat as it should be.
Thank you, Pam. I appreciate that. Okay, we are at 10:19, according to my phone. Our next, we're quite a bit ahead of schedule, so we're moving into the questions and discussion period well ahead of time. And actually, let me see, I've got, this is a question from Tom. And I also, I'm not sure which Tom this is. There are many of them. But Pam, you had indicated that there were two concurrent. Oh, this is not really a question, he says. There are two concurrent sort of outreach components. One is sort of getting the community scoping on the existing project as it stands, and then of course future visioning of what's going on upstream. And that seemed to be handled mostly by, well, in partnership with OVLC, I should say. And so I don't know if you could speak to how the community could be engaged with the OVLC visioning process, or if there's someone from OVLC who'd like to speak to that. I don't want to call anybody out, but I noticed that there were a few potentially people from OVLC in attendance. But Pam, if you'd like to speak to that in a moment, but I want to first read this question. And we suspect that this is the question from Tom. We suspect that those least Bell's Vireo nested in the floodplain forest this year. So he says that's really a question. I guess in the monitoring, has that been seen?
Yes, so our biological monitor did see least Bell's Vireo and presumably nesting this year for the first time. So, so that was pretty exciting. And that will have to be considered during the permitting phase of the process, since they are endangered.
And I guess the question that I would have is, I mean, there should be an extraordinarily abundant amount of ecosystem benefits that are provided by this project. And so I would imagine that there will be substantial areas along the river that would then become better least Bell's Vireo nesting habitat versus what we have currently. Is that an accurate statement? So that there would be potentially be even more habitat for least Bell's Vireo compared to existing?
Not necessarily. Vireos like willow thickets. Right now we do have quite a few willow thickets, and they will just get thicker. But the vireos also like edges. So I think having the stream bed restored will still provide suitable least Bell's Vireo habitat. Maybe not as much as is there now, but it will still be suitable, and it will open up suitability for many other species that we don't have now.
Very good.
So yeah, but it's very exciting to have the Vireo there.
And we had the question answered about sort of how to engage, how to get material with respect to the Manila Dam project itself. But do you have a sense from OVLC sort of how the community can engage in their visioning component?
I think I would let OVLC handle that question.
Okay. All right. That was the last of the questions that we have. What I'd like to do is open
Jamie,
up. Yes, sir.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry to interrupt. This is David Yardis again. I think Tom Maloney is on, and he might want to speak to just a thumbnail on the outreach efforts associated, sort of what the game plan is for the visioning efforts and community outreach. Tom, are you around?
Oh, I see his hand.
Yeah, look, I actually have a mute button now.
Yay. Hey, Tom.
Hi. Yeah, so 2 points. One, I'm the bird nerd, Tom, that also has seen least Bell's Vireo up above the dam, and I'm actually really optimistic with a sort of sample size of 1 from the big sediment load after the Thomas fire on the Ventura River Preserve. We've already seen pretty significant vegetation change from the fine sediments being restored to that reach of river. And I think, to Pam's point, the long vision would be that we'd have a more representative riparian habitat in a longer stretch that could support both least Bell's Vireo and southwestern willow flycatcher, particularly if we control cowbird populations in the more fragmented portions of the landscape. So, I think as we look at, the temporal nature of these things, you kind of have to make a sacrifice in the immediate to get the long-term benefit. And I think that's going to be something that we wrestle with through the EIR process and the Federal Endangered Species Act process. With regard to our public outreach, sort of, as Pam said, watershed protection is having to deal with the really technical details of the mechanics of dam removal and infrastructure support. Whereas my perspective has been, since I got to town, is that people have heard about this for so long, but they don't really have a sense of what we're aspiring to create. And so we hired, using Resources Legacy Fund money, we hired did a competitive bid process that everybody was involved in, watershed protection and others, to review some of the other funding agencies, to review the proposals. And we selected a firm called SALT out of LA. We did, when David was in town recently, we did a big download on them. They're churning away at all the documentation, trying to figure out what things might look like one day. One thing we all collectively agreed on is for them to put out sort of a straw proposal or some imagery for people to react to, some notions about what we're trying to create there. I think Julie's still on the call. There's a lot of conversation about how do we really honor the Chumash legacy up there, and do it in a way that's authentic and suitable and honors that history. So there's a lot to it. There will be two or three, I think, two public sort of charrette processes and some survey work that we're going to do to get public attitudes about what people would really like to see. The last point I would make is that during COVID, we really got a sense of how important water-based recreation opportunities are in this region. And so really thinking about the opportunities we're creating through this removable and ecosystem restoration project in the context of the whole river is a really important sort of perspective to bring to bear on it. So stay tuned. SALT's churning away, as I said. We'll probably sometime a bit concurrent with the wintertime outreach that Pam and her consultants will be doing. We'll be doing a slightly different process, looking at what's the aspiration rather than, what are all the boxes you have to check to get the permits in place.
Awesome. Thank you for that information, Tom. And thank you, Pam. Appreciate that. And thank you, David, for calling Tom out. I didn't want to do it.
David's really worried about what a shrinking violet I am.
Well, communication helps. Communication helps. Here we are at 10:30, a few minutes before. This is actually about when we would be moving into the questions and discussion phase of this meeting. And then we have some concluding remarks from Glenn. So we are about half an hour removed from the official finish for this meeting. However, I want to give a few moments for any additional questions, any additional comments. But if there are none, then we can obviously move forward and have Glenn close out comments for today's meeting. So
Jamie, I do have one comment. We did get an answer to Julie's question. Patrick Tumamite did do some cultural monitoring in April in some areas where we did some soil disturbance. No resources were found, and I can coordinate with her directly on that information.
Excellent. Thank you for researching that for us, Pam.
Thank you, Christopher. He also did some of them.
Excellent. It takes a team. All right. Well, I see no additional questions. Speak now, forever hold your peace. So here's a question that pops up. Oh, Anonymous said, thank you, Pam. So no question, mere comment. So with that, Glenn, I'd like to go ahead and see if you're ready to close us out.
Sure, will do. Are you passing the helm back to me?
I'm passing the helm back to you. I'm sure everyone would appreciate a few moments of their lives back. We can move on to other things
Yeah.
and go look at
Yeah,
information on the website.
Thanks for our presenters today and the RCD for hosting through the Watershed Council. I wanted to just I have a couple comments that I didn't really bring up at the beginning. Many who have been involved with this project from the county side and our stakeholders recall from the CEO's office at the county, Sue Hughes, who had been involved with this project, goes all the way back to the beginning from her role as producing and getting the board every year to adopt a legislative platform. Well, she's going to retire this January, and Michelle Guzman is going to take her place. So I bring that up as a point of departure, as Sue has been a great contributor in the past, and more recently in the last couple of years, she's provided a lot more engagement with respect to the project management team. That also includes Supervisor LeBeer's office and his personal engagement, which was highlighted this past August when the whole team went up to Sacramento and he had a chance to address the Wildlife Conservation Board in response to that grant in late August. So I bring that up as a point of connection from the political engagement and energy that's being renewed, and back to the moniker of making progress and building momentum. The other aspect, just within Public Works Agency, Jeff Pratt, who also has a long history with that, hired David Fleisch as an assistant to him in the Public Works Agency, and Dave Fleisch is now getting involved in all things Matilla as well, and participated in that same event in August to Sacramento. So there's building momentum and strengthening resolve from a staff involvement perspective from the county, and the political engagement from Supervisor LeBeer is all is building, is strengthening. So that would be my parting comment from today. I certainly appreciate everyone who's attended. I see we're up to 56, so that's about 15 more or so than we had in the spring. So that maybe that strengthens my idea of building momentum. There's more people interested and seeing the activities that were presented today.
Thank you, Glenn. I appreciate those comments.
Jamie, I had one more. Christopher Solis, while he talked about the great aspects of Santa Ana Bridge, he did not mention what I was highlighting at the beginning, that this is a big milestone, and there was no big bang there in that discussion. And so the big bang is that on the 17th in the morning at 10 o'clock at the Santa Ana Bridge is the ribbon cutting, and there'll be lots of people involved with that. But that's an official milestone to recognize completion of a significant project that goes with that same moniker.
Appreciate that, Glenn. But we do have another question. So if you could please repeat that date, I think many people are going to want to put that on their calendar.
So it's Monday, October 17th, 10 o'clock at the bridge.
Thank you. All right. Oh, let me see. I'm done. So I just want to say appreciate those remarks, and certainly, yes, the partnerships are very important. The team working together is so very important. And it's just really nice to see that original seed money for planning and original seed money to get these construction projects moving along seems to have snowballed into additional funders being interested because there's an actual concrete, so to speak, vision of seeing this project come to fruition. And it's really nice to see success begets success, so that as you start down that planning and funding pathway, there seem to be additional opportunities that sort of line up one way or another. But that doesn't just happen overnight. That speaks to persistence, it speaks to partnerships, and particularly speaks to teamwork. So thanks to all the team involved in the MDERP project. It's really nice on this end to just see things moving forward. And I'm sure I speak on behalf of the attendees in saying that. So thank you, Glenn, and thank you to the rest of the team. One last thing I want to say on behalf of the Watershed Council and the Ventura County Resource Conservation District, acting as the watershed coordinator for the council. This meeting has been recorded, so we will be posting this to the Watershed Council website. We'll also hopefully be able to get information from today's meeting so that they're all available there at the council website. I do not have the next date for the next meeting. However, please make sure to be looking for that Watershed Council newsletter so that you can get the information to attend the upcoming meeting. So with that, if there are no additional final comments, questions, I'm ready to close out this meeting. Seeing none, I welcome everyone to again visit the matillahadam.org website, visit the Watershed Council website, and we'll see you at the next meeting.
Thanks, Jamie, for your partnership.
Thank you, Jamie.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye-bye, everyone.